A mute vampire prince tried to order food in a human town, but no one understood his desperate gestures. Then a single mom stepped forward and signed a message that changed everything. What she didn't know, the boy she helped was royalty, and his father was about to tear the world apart looking for him. The castle guards changed shifts at midnight. Oren had been counting the seconds for 3 weeks. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall of the servants' corridor, his small frame hidden beneath a traveling cloak he'd stolen from the laundry chambers. His heart hammered in his chest, not from fear of being caught, but from the intoxicating possibility of freedom. 11 years. 11 years of stone walls, blood ceremonies, and silent dinners where everyone spoke about him, but never to him. 11 years of watching the human world from his tower window, forbidden to step beyond the bloodstone gates. Tonight that ended. A diplomatic carriage rattled through the courtyard below, human emissaries from the Western territories, arriving for yet another tedious negotiation about border disputes. Perfect. The guards would be distracted for at least an hour, ushering the humans through the proper channels, ensuring no sunlight charms or holy water made it past the entrance. Oren moved like a shadow. Fitting, since shadows were what his tutors said he'd become. Forgettable, voiceless, a prince in name only. His father, King Davin, had stopped trying to teach him to speak after the accident 5 years ago. The royal physicians said his vocal cords were permanently damaged. The court whispered he was cursed. No one asked what he thought. He slipped through the kitchen entrance, past the blood cellars where servants prepared the evening's refreshments, and found the drainage tunnel he discovered last summer. It smelled of moss and copper, but it led beyond the outer wall, beyond the wards that kept him trapped like a bird with clipped wings. The tunnel was narrow. His shoulders scraped against wet stone as he crawled, his cloak catching on jagged rocks. But then he felt it. Fresh air. Not the stale, ancient atmosphere of the castle, but real air that carried the scent of pine trees and rain-soaked earth. Oren emerged into the forest just as the moon broke through the clouds, illuminating a path he'd only seen in stolen maps. The human border town of Greybrook lay 2 miles east. He ran. His legs, usually confined to the castle's measured hallways, burned with the effort. Branches whipped at his face. His boots, too fine for this terrain, slipped on wet leaves. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every step was a word he couldn't speak, a scream of joy and terror and desperate, aching need to see something beyond stone walls. By the time Greybrook's lights appeared through the trees, Oren's hunger had begun to claw at his throat. He hadn't fed before leaving, couldn't risk alerting the servants. Vampire children didn't need blood as often as adults, but 3 days without it left him shaky and weak. The town was smaller than he'd imagined. Wooden buildings clustered around a central square, their windows glowing with warm candlelight. The smell hit him first: bread, roasting meat, human things that his tutors said were inferior to their refined blood wines. He wanted to try everything. Pulling his hood lower, Oren stepped onto the cobblestone street. His boots clicked too loudly. Several people glanced his way, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. He realized his mistake immediately. His cloak, though simple by castle standards, was made of fabric too rich for a common traveler. And his skin, even in the dim lamplight, was too pale. Blend in. He needed to blend in. A bakery stood on the corner, its window displaying rows of golden pastries that made his stomach clench with an unfamiliar hunger, not for blood, but for experience. For something he'd never tasted. Oren approached the counter, where a heavy-set man with flour-dusted hands was arranging loaves of bread. The man looked up, his smile automatic and commercial. "Evening, lad. What'll it be?" Oren opened his mouth, closed it. The familiar frustration burned in his chest as no sound emerged. He pointed at the pastries instead, holding up 3 fingers. The baker's smile faltered. "Which one, son?" Oren pointed more emphatically, his movements becoming jerky with anxiety. In the castle, servants understood his gestures. They'd been trained to read his basic signs. But this man just stared at him with growing confusion. You mute or something? The baker's tone had shifted from friendly to suspicious. Other customers were watching now. Oren felt their eyes like physical weight. He nodded desperately, trying to mime eating, pointing again at the pastries, reaching for the coins he'd taken from the castle treasury. Hold on, the baker leaned forward, squinting. What's that on your cloak? Oren's blood went cold. The clasp, the stupid ceremonial clasp he'd forgotten to remove, bore the bloodstone insignia. A crimson gem shaped like a drop of blood, surrounded by thorns. That's the vampire crest, the baker's voice rose. Someone get the guard. The shop went silent. Then erupted. A vampire? In Greybrook. Where's his escort? Might be a spy. Could be one of them changelings. Oren backed toward the door, his hands raised in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. But his panic made his movements too fast, too fluid. Unmistakably inhuman. A woman shrieked. Someone grabbed a broom like a weapon. This was wrong. All wrong. They were supposed to be curious, maybe cautious, but not this. Not treating him like a monster before he'd even. His back hit something solid. Not a wall. A person. Oren spun around, his fangs extending involuntarily, a fear response he couldn't control. But the woman standing behind him didn't scream. She didn't raise a weapon. Instead, she lifted her hands and signed, her movements slow and deliberate. Are you hungry? Oren froze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Sign language. Real, proper sign language. Not the crude gestures his tutors had created specifically for him, but the actual human version he'd only seen in books. The woman signed again. Slow down. Show me what you want. She was perhaps 30, with brown hair tied back and eyes that held no fear, only patience. Behind her, a small girl peered around her mother's skirt, watching Oren with open curiosity rather than terror. For the first time in 11 years, someone was speaking his language. Oren's hands trembled as he signed back. 3 pastries. Please. I have money. The woman, Mira, he would later learn, turned to the baker with a calm smile that somehow commanded more authority than any shout. He'd like 3 apple turnovers. I'll pay. Miss Mira, that's a vampire. That's a hungry child. Her voice remained even, but something in her tone made the baker close his mouth. 3 turnovers, please. As Mira counted out coins, Oren noticed her eyes flick to the clasp at his throat, the one bearing his family's crest. Her expression didn't change, but her hand paused for just a fraction of a second. She knew. She knew exactly who he was. And she was helping him anyway. Myra's hand trembled slightly as she handed Oren the pastries wrapped in brown paper. She signed quickly, her movements sharp with urgency. Follow me. Not safe here. Oren clutched the package to his chest, his eyes darting between Mira and the growing crowd. The baker was whispering furiously to a man in a leather vest, a town guard, judging by the crude sword at his hip. Others were blocking the doorway, their faces twisted with suspicion and fear. I don't want trouble, Oren signed, his hands shaking. Too late for that, Mira signed back. Then, to the crowd, she spoke aloud with a confidence that seemed to surprise even her. He's my nephew. From the Northern Territories. He's visiting for the week. Your nephew? The baker's eyes narrowed. You never mentioned. I don't report my family matters to you, Gerald. Myra's voice was pleasant but firm as she took Oren's arm, gently, not grabbing, giving him the choice to pull away. He didn't. We'll be going now. Thank you for your concern. She guided Oren toward the door, her daughter Lyri trailing behind them, her small hand gripping her mother's skirt. The crowd parted reluctantly, their mutters following like angry wasps. Not natural. Too pale to be her kin. Should tell the border patrol. Once outside, Mira didn't slow down. She led Oren through a series of narrow alleys, away from the main square, her pace quick but not panicked. Lyri skipped alongside them, completely unbothered by the tension, humming a tuneless song. "Mama," Leary said, her words slightly slurred. The speech delay Oren would later learn about. "Is he really our cousin?" "No, sweetness. But he needs help, and that's what we do, remember? We help people who need it." Leary nodded seriously, then looked up at Oren with a gap-toothed smile. "I like your cloak. It's pretty." Oren's throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. When had anyone called anything about him pretty? When had a child looked at him without fear? They reached a small house on the edge of town, modest, with a vegetable garden and a weather-worn fence. Mira finally stopped, turning to face Oren. In the moonlight, he could see the worry lines around her eyes, the exhaustion that came from raising a child alone. She signed. Inside. Quickly. The house was warm, painfully, wonderfully warm, with mismatched furniture and drawings pinned to the walls. Leary's artwork, crude but cheerful. It smelled of herbs and old wood, nothing like the cold grandeur of Bloodstone Castle. Mira lit a lamp and closed the curtains. Only then did she turn to Oren and sign. "Take off the cloak. That clasp will get you killed." Oren's hands went to the clasp instinctively, protective. It was the only thing that identified him, that proved he wasn't just some runaway street child, but... "You're Prince Oren," Mira signed, her expression unreadable. "Second heir to the Bloodstone throne. The mute prince." Oren stepped back, his fangs extending again.
How did she know?
Had this been a trap? Was she going to sell him too? Mira raised her hands peacefully. "My husband was a border guard. Before he died, her signs were slower now, almost sad. He used to come home with stories about the vampire court, about the young prince who couldn't speak, who watched the human world from his tower like a prisoner." "I'm not a prisoner," Oren signed defensively. "Then why did you run away?" The question hit harder than any accusation. Oren's hands dropped to his sides. He had no answer, or rather, he had too many answers, none of which he could articulate even with sign language. Myra's expression softened. She knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level, something no one in the castle had ever done. "You're safe here tonight. But in the morning, people will ask questions. That baker has a big mouth, and the town guard will want to investigate." "I'll leave," Oren signed quickly. "I won't put you in danger." "Where will you go?" Oren had no answer to that either. He'd been so focused on escaping that he hadn't thought past seeing Greybrook. The human world was supposed to be his salvation, not another cage. "Mama." "He looks sad," Leary said, tugging on Myra's sleeve. "Can he have some milk?" "Milk makes me feel better when I'm sad." Mira smiled and stood, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Good idea, love." To Oren, she signed. "Sit.
Eat.
We'll figure this out." As Oren unwrapped the pastries with trembling hands, the first bite of apple turnover nearly made him cry. It was sweet and warm and normal, not the refined blood wines or the ceremonial meals served on silver platters. It tasted like freedom, like everything he'd been missing. Mira poured milk for both children, then sat across from Oren, her own cup of tea steaming in her hands. She studied him for a long moment, and Oren wondered what she saw, a vampire prince, a runaway child, or something in between. Finally, she signed, "Your father will be looking for you." Oren's appetite vanished. He nodded slowly. "When he finds out you're missing, what will he do?" Oren's hands shook as he signed the truth. "He'll think the humans took me. He'll send everyone. Hunters. Soldiers. He'll tear apart every town between here and the castle." Myra's face went pale. "How long before he notices you're gone?" Oren glanced at the window, at the moon's position in the sky. He held up 3 fingers. 3 hours? He shook his head.
3
minutes. Oren nodded miserably. At that exact moment, church bells began ringing across Greybrook, not the gentle evening chimes, but the frantic, discordant clanging of an emergency alarm. Mira rushed to the window and peered through the curtains. Her face went ashen. "Oh no," she whispered. They're already here. Through the gap in the curtains, Oren could see them. Massive winged shadows circling above the town, and on the ground, vampire knights in black armor, moving through the streets with predatory grace. His father had sent the elite guard, and they were searching every house. 3 hours earlier, Bloodstone Castle. King Davin stood at the head of the Grand Council chamber, his patience wearing thinner with each tedious sentence from the human ambassador. Trade routes, border taxes, harvest disputes. The same circular arguments they'd been having for centuries, dressed up in slightly different words. And if your majesty would consider reducing the blood tax on the northern settlements by even 15%. Denied, Davin's voice cut through the ambassador's, droning like a blade. The blood tax remains unchanged. We protect those settlements from the feral clans. Protection has a price. The ambassador's face reddened, but he bowed stiffly. Of course, your majesty. Perhaps we could discuss. A sharp knock interrupted him. The chamber doors burst open, and Commander Saren, head of the royal guard, strode in with an expression that made Davin's blood run cold. In 300 years, he'd never seen Saren look frightened. Your majesty, I must speak with you. Immediately, the ambassador sputtered. We're in the middle of. Leave. Davin's command was absolute. All of you.
Now.
The diplomats scrambled out like mice fleeing a hawk. The moment the doors closed, Davin descended from his throne. Report. Prince Oren is missing, sire. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Frost crept across the windows. Explain. Saren's military composure cracked slightly. His servant went to prepare him for bed and found his chambers empty. We've searched the entire East Wing, the libraries, When was he last seen? Dinner service. 6 hours ago. 6 hours. His son had been gone for 6 hours, and no one had noticed. Rage and fear warred in Davin's chest, rage at his guard's incompetence, fear that clawed at his centuries-old heart in a way battle never had. The wards. Davin's voice was deadly quiet. Intact, sire. Nothing breached them from outside. Then he's still in the castle. We've searched everywhere, your majesty. 3 times. Davin moved to the window overlooking the courtyard. The human diplomatic carriages were still there, their guards milling about, waiting for their masters. His mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Oren wouldn't run away. He was a good boy, quiet, obedient, never caused trouble. Unlike his older brother who died in the Feral Wars, Oren understood duty. He understood. The drainage tunnel. The memory hit Davin like a physical blow. 30 years ago, before Oren was born, there had been a servant's passage that led beyond the outer walls. They'd sealed it during the castle renovations, but the ward system wouldn't have covered it because technically it was still inside the original castle boundaries. The old servant tunnels, Davin said. The ones from the western expansion. Saren's eyes widened. Sire, those were sealed. Find them. If any are open, I want to know where they lead. 10 minutes later, Saren returned, his face grim. We found disturbed mud near the kitchen drainage outlet. Fresh tracks, child-sized, heading east.
East.
Toward the human territories. Davin's hands clenched until his claws drew blood from his own palms. His son, his mute, defenseless son, was wandering human lands alone, unable to call for help, unable to explain himself. Or worse. The humans' Davin's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried enough menace to make Saren step back. This was planned. They distracted us with their pointless negotiations while. Sire, we have no evidence. My son is missing. The roar shook the castle walls. Tapestries fell. Windows cracked. In the courtyard below, the human guards stumbled and drew their weapons reflexively. Davin forced himself to breathe, to think past the fury that threatened to consume him. If the humans had Oren, if they were using him as leverage, they would pay in ways that would make the Feral Wars look like a minor dispute. But if they didn't have him, if Oren had simply run away. Why would he run? What had driven his quiet, gentle son to risk everything for a glimpse of a world that would never accept him? The guilt twisted like a knife. How long had it been since he'd truly talked to Oren? How long since he'd done more than nod at his son's simple signs before returning to matters of state? Sound the full alarm, Davin ordered, his voice now ice-cold and controlled. Mobilize the elite guard, the Shadow Scouts, and the Nightwing Cavalry. Send riders to every border town between here and the Western Territories. Your Majesty, if we mobilize that many forces, the humans will assume we're preparing for war. I don't care what they assume. I want my son found.
Alive.
Unharmed, Davin turned to face Saren fully, his eyes glowing crimson with barely contained power. And if any human has laid a hand on him, I want that town burned to ash. Are we clear? Crystal, sire. One more thing. Davin moved toward the door, his cloak billowing behind him. Detain the human diplomats. No one leaves this castle until Oren is found. Sire, that will be seen as an act of. I said detain them, Commander.
Comfortably.
But they are not to leave or send messages. If this is a coordinated abduction, their allies will be waiting for confirmation. We give them nothing. Within 20 minutes, the castle erupted into controlled chaos. Vampire knights mounted their black stallions. Nightwing cavalry, elite soldiers bonded with massive bats, took to the skies. Shadow Scouts, specialists in tracking and stealth, melted into the darkness. Davin himself donned his battle armor for the first time in 15 years. Black plate etched with crimson runes, forged in the heart of the Blood Moon Forge. His sword, Nightfall, hummed with ancient power as he strapped it to his side. He would search personally. And if his son had been taken, if someone had dared to use Oren as a pawn in their political games, they would learn why the Bloodstone dynasty had ruled for 1,000 years. They would learn what it meant to threaten a vampire king's child. As Davin mounted his warhorse in the courtyard, the human ambassador was escorted past under guard. The man's face was white with terror. Your Majesty, please, there must be some misunderstanding. There is indeed a misunderstanding, Davin said coldly. You thought you could take my son and face no consequences. You will remain here as our guest until this matter is resolved. Pray that he's found unharmed. We didn't take, we would never. But Davin was already riding through the gates, his forces spreading out like a dark tide, heading toward every human settlement within a night's ride. Greybrook was the closest. Greybrook would be first. The church bells wouldn't stop ringing. Mira pulled the curtains fully closed and turned to face Oren, who stood frozen in the middle of her small living room, his eyes wide with terror. Leary had stopped humming, sensing the sudden shift in her mother's mood. The cellar, Mira signed frantically.
Now.
They'll search everywhere. Oren signed back, his hands jerky with panic. If they find me here, they'll think you kidnapped me. My father will. Your father will listen to reason. You don't know him. Oren's signs were sharp, almost angry. When he's angry, he doesn't listen to anyone. Outside, shouts echoed through the streets. The sound of boots on cobblestones. The distinctive screech of a night wing, a sound that made every human in Greybrook remember old stories about the vampire wars, about entire villages disappearing in a single night.
Nana.
Leary's voice was small, frightened. What's happening? Mira knelt beside her daughter, forcing her voice to remain calm. Remember when we practiced the quiet game? We're going to play it now. Can you be very, very quiet for Mama? Leary nodded, her eyes filling with tears, but her lips pressed firmly together. A heavy knock shook the front door. Then another, more insistent. Open up. Royal inspection by order of King Davin. Myra's mind raced. The cellar was too obvious. The bedroom would be checked immediately. The attic had no hiding places. Her eyes landed on the large storage chest where she kept winter blankets, cramped, but possible. There, she signed to Oren, pointing. He shook his head violently. Too dangerous for you. Open this door or we'll break it down.
Get in the chest.
Now, Myra's signs were no longer a suggestion, but a command. Unless you want everyone in this town dead by morning. That did it. Oren rushed to the chest, climbing inside and curling into a tight ball. Mira threw blankets over him and closed the lid just as the door burst open. 3 vampire knights filled her doorway, their armor absorbing the lamplight, making them look like walking shadows. Behind them, she could see human town guards, Gerald the baker among them, his face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "That's her," Gerald said, pointing at Mira. "That's the woman who was with the vampire child." The lead knight stepped forward, his eyes glowing faintly red. "You were seen with a young vampire boy earlier this evening. Where is he?" Mira picked up Leary, holding her daughter close. "I helped a confused child order food. That's all." "Witnesses say he bore the royal insignia." The knight's voice was cold, mechanical. "Prince Oren is missing. If you're harboring him, you're guilty of kidnapping a royal heir. The penalty is death." "I'm not harboring anyone. You're welcome to search my home." The knight's eyes narrowed. "You're very calm for someone accused of such a crime." "I'm calm because I'm innocent." Mira met his gaze steadily, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "My husband was a border guard. He taught me that panic looks like guilt." "Your husband is dead," one of the other knights said. "Thomas Ashford. Killed in a feral clan raid 3 years ago." The casual mention of her late husband, the way they said it like a threat, made Myra's blood run cold. They'd researched her. They knew exactly who she was. "Search the house," the lead knight ordered. The knights moved through her home like a storm, overturning furniture, checking under the bed, ripping open cupboards. Leary whimpered against Myra's shoulder. One knight approached the storage chest, and Myra's breath caught in her throat. His hand rested on the lid. "Please," Mira said, her voice cracking for the first time. "You're scaring my daughter. She has nothing to do with this." The knight looked at Leary's tear-stained face and, for a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. He moved away from the chest, continuing his search elsewhere. "Nothing, Commander," one knight reported. "Check the garden. The cellar. Every inch." As the knights searched outside, Gerald pushed his way into the house. "I'm telling you, she had him. The boy had the crest and everything. And now he's not here," the lead knight said coldly. "Perhaps you were mistaken." "I wasn't mistaken. He was pale as death, had fangs. Many vampire children come through Greybrook with their families. The prince wouldn't be wandering alone." The knight turned back to Mira. "Where did the boy go after you bought him food?" Mira had prepared for this question. "He ran off toward the northern road when people started shouting. I assumed he went back to wherever his family was staying." "You didn't think to report a vampire child wandering alone?" "I didn't think a hungry child deserved to be terrorized by a mob." The knight studied her for a long moment. "You realize that if we find out you're lying, your daughter becomes an orphan." The threat was clear. Mira tightened her arms around Leary, who had buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "I understand, but I'm telling the truth." From outside, more shouts erupted. Not vampire knights this time, but human voices, angry, frightened, escalating. "How dare they storm into our town, treating us like criminals? My rights as a citizen." The lead knight cursed under his breath. "The humans are getting restless. Should we suppress them, Commander?"
No.
"The king wants minimal casualties. We're searching for the prince, not starting a war." He glanced back at Mira. "We'll be watching this house. If the boy makes contact, you report it immediately." "Understood?" Mira nodded, not trusting her voice. The knights left, but through the window, Mira could see them taking up positions around her house, not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to see anyone who entered or left. They were trapped. She waited until their footsteps faded before opening the chest. Oren emerged, gasping for air, his face stricken with guilt. "I'm sorry," he signed, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. "I'm so sorry." Outside, the town was erupting. Human guards arguing with vampire knights. Citizens gathering in angry clusters. the fragile peace between the two races fracturing with each passing minute. And at the center of it all was one frightened boy who just wanted to order pastries. Mira pulled Oren into a tight hug, the first real physical comfort he'd received in years. He stiffened in surprise, then melted into it, his small body shaking with silent sobs. "We'll figure this out," Mira whispered, even though she had no idea how. Because Graybrook was turning into a powder keg. And they were standing right in the middle of it. The hours after midnight were the longest of Oren's life. He sat at Myra's small kitchen table, wrapped in a plain wool blanket she'd given him to replace his royal cloak, which was now hidden in the bottom of the storage chest. Leary had finally fallen asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling peacefully, oblivious to the danger her mother had invited into their home. Mira moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, brewing tea and preparing a simple meal of bread and cheese. She tried to offer Oren regular food, but he'd had to explain, through halting and embarrassed signs, that he needed blood. "How often?" she'd signed, her expression unreadable. "Every few days. I can last a week if I have to." He'd looked away, ashamed. "I took some before I left, but it wasn't much." Without a word, Mira had retrieved a small knife and a cup. Before Oren could understand what she was doing, she'd pricked her finger and squeezed several drops of blood into the cup, then added water to dilute it.
"No."
Oren had signed frantically, pushing the cup away. You can't. You need it," she'd signed back simply. "And I can spare a few drops. It's dangerous. What if I lose control? What if I hurt you?" Mira had smiled, then a sad, knowing smile. "My husband told me about vampire children. You're not feral. You have more control than you think." Now, Oren stared at the cup in front of him, still untouched. The scent was overwhelming, making his fangs ache and his hands tremble, but the thought of taking even a drop from this woman who'd saved him felt like a betrayal. "Drink it," Mira signed, settling into the chair across from him. "You'll need your strength." "Why are you helping me?" Oren's signs were sharp with confusion and guilt. "You could die for this. Your daughter could lose you. Why risk everything for someone you just met?" Mira was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on the table. When she finally signed, her movements were slow, deliberate. "When my husband died, this town treated us like a burden. His pension was denied because of some paperwork error. People whispered that I was a widow with a difficult child. No one helped." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Then one day, a traveling merchant saw me struggling to carry groceries while Leary was having a bad day.
He helped.
Didn't ask for anything.
Just
helped." She paused, glancing at her sleeping daughter. "He told me, kindness isn't about deserving. It's about being human, so I decided, if I ever had the chance to help someone who was struggling, someone everyone else had turned away from, I would." Oren felt his throat tighten, not with thirst, but with an emotion so overwhelming he had no name for it. In 11 years, no one had ever chosen him. Not really. People obeyed him because of his title, pitted him because of his condition, but chose to help him. Never. "I don't deserve this," he signed, his hands shaking. "Maybe not. But you need it. That's enough." Finally, Oren lifted the cup and drank. The blood was weak, diluted, barely enough to take the edge off his hunger, but it was freely given, and that made it taste better than any refined wine his father's cellars could offer. When he set the cup down, Mira signed, "Tell me about your family." Oren's hands froze. Where could he even begin? How could he explain the isolation, the silence, the way his father looked past him rather than at him? "My father is a king," he signed slowly. "But he's not a father. Not really. Not since I lost my voice." "What happened?" The memory was painful, even after 5 years. "Accident during training. I fell from the castle wall. The healers saved my life but couldn't save my voice." He paused, then added bitterly, "My father stopped looking at me after that. I became the broken prince, the spare heir that everyone hoped would just disappear." That's why you ran. It wasn't a question, but Oren nodded anyway. I just wanted to see something real. Something that wasn't stone walls and people pretending I didn't exist. His signs grew more agitated. But now I've put you in danger. I've turned your town into a war zone. Everyone would be safer if I just went back. And would you be safer? The question caught him off guard.
Would he?
Physically, yes. The castle was the most secure place in the kingdom. But safe from loneliness? Safe from the suffocating silence of being surrounded by people who refused to truly see him.
No.
I don't know, he signed honestly. Mira reached across the table and gently took his hands, stopping his anxious signing, forcing him to be still. Her touch was warm, maternal, everything he'd been missing. Listen to me, she said aloud, knowing he could read lips. Then she signed. You are not a burden.
You are not broken.
You are a child who deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. That's not asking too much. That's asking for the bare minimum. Oren's vision blurred with tears. In the vampire court, crying was weakness. Emotion was something to be controlled, suppressed, hidden away like his voice. But here, in this tiny kitchen with this human woman who owed him nothing, his tears felt like release. What do we do now? He signed when he could control his hands again. Myra's expression turned serious. In the morning, this town will tear itself apart looking for you. Humans will blame vampires. Vampires will blame humans. We need to leave. Where? Windfall Village. 2 days' journey inland. My sister lives there. It's safer, farther from the border. She studied his face carefully. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When we get there, we figure out how to contact your father without getting everyone killed. This can't go on forever. Eventually, you'll have to face him. The thought of facing his father after this filled Oren with dread. But Mira was right. Running wouldn't solve anything. It would only make things worse. I promise, he signed. Outside, the false dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. In a few hours, the town would wake to find vampire knights still patrolling the streets, and the fragile peace would shatter completely. They had to move fast. Mira stood and began gathering supplies, food, water, a change of clothes for Leary. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd had to flee before, who understood what it meant to leave everything behind at a moment's notice. Oren watched her and wondered if his father had ever met anyone like Mira Ashford. Someone who chose compassion over safety, who saw a frightened child instead of a political problem. Probably not. And that, Oren realized, was the real tragedy of the vampire court. They'd forgotten how to be human. Dawn broke over Greybrook like a wound, red and angry, promising blood. Mira had just finished loading a small cart with their belongings when the first scream echoed through the town square. She froze, her hand on the horse's bridle, and exchanged a terrified glance with Oren, who was hidden beneath a tarp in the back of the cart. Stay down, she whispered. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Through the gaps in the fence, she could see people running toward the square. Not fleeing, converging. Something was happening. Mama, I'm scared, Leary whimpered, clutching her mother's skirt. I know, sweetheart. Just stay close to me. Against her better judgment, Mira walked toward the commotion, keeping Leary behind her. If they were going to escape, she needed to know what they were escaping from. The town square had transformed overnight into an armed camp. Vampire knights stood on one side, their dark armor gleaming in the early light. But now, on the opposite side, a new force had arrived, human hunters, at least 30 of them, wearing the green and gold livery of the Royal Human Guard. And leading them was Captain Werner, a man whose reputation for vampire hunting was legendary and terrifying in equal measure. Violation of the Greybrook Accord. Werner was shouting, his hand on the hilt of his silver-plated sword. You have no authority to occupy a human settlement without formal notification. The vampire commander, the same one who'd searched Myra's house, stood his ground. We're searching for the missing heir to the Bloodstone throne. The Accord allows for emergency protocols in cases of emergency protocols, my ass. You've terrorized this entire town, searching homes without warrants, threatening civilians. Werner's face was red with fury. I have testimonies from 15 families who were dragged from their beds at sword point. We were conducting a search for. You were conducting an invasion. Werner turned to address the growing crowd of townspeople. Citizens of Greybrook. Did these vampires ask your permission to enter your homes? Did they show you any official documents? Did they respect your rights? And oh, the crowd roared back. Mira felt her stomach drop. This wasn't about finding Oren anymore. This was about decades of resentment, years of border tensions, centuries of mutual distrust all coming to a head. This was about war. The boy came through here, the vampire commander said, his voice strained with forced calm. Multiple witnesses saw him. A woman helped him. A woman showed basic human decency to a hungry child.
Werner interrupted.
Is that a crime now? Should we arrest everyone who's ever helped a vampire? She may have information about. Or maybe your prince ran away because he's tired of your tyranny. Werner drew his sword, not pointing it, not yet, but the threat was clear. Maybe he's seeking asylum in human lands. Maybe we should grant it. The vampire commander's eyes blazed red. That is an act of war. Then perhaps war is what we need. Werner's words hung in the air like a curse. Perhaps it's time we stopped bowing to bloodsuckers who think they can do whatever they want in our towns. The crowd erupted in cheers. Mira saw neighbors she'd known for years. Gerald the baker, Thomas the blacksmith, even sweet old Mrs. Chun from the flower shop, their faces twisted with hatred and fear. Enough! A new voice cut through the chaos like thunder. Everyone turned. King Davin stood at the edge of the square, having arrived so silently that no one had noticed. He wasn't in his battle armor anymore. Instead, he wore traveling clothes, though his crown remained, catching the morning light. Behind him, more vampire knights materialized from the shadows. The square fell silent. Davin's eyes scanned the crowd with predatory precision, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. My son is missing. Every moment he's out there, alone, unable to call for help, is a moment closer to tragedy. I will find him, and I will destroy anyone who stands in my way. Your Majesty, Werner said, not backing down despite the fear evident in his rigid posture. With respect, your knights have overstepped. Captain Werner, Davin's gaze fixed on him. I remember you. You led the raid on the Crimson Pass settlement 15 years ago. Killed 17 vampires. 3 of them were children.
Werner's jaw tightened.
They were feral clan. They'd slaughtered an entire village. And you determined their guilt without trial, without evidence. Just like you're doing now, Davin stepped forward, and even the human soldiers backed away instinctively. You assume my son was kidnapped. You assume humans are innocent. You assume I'm here to wage war. But all I want is my child back. For a brief moment, something flickered in the king's expression, not anger, but raw, desperate fear. The mask of the ruthless monarch slipped, revealing a father who hadn't slept, who'd searched through the night, who was barely holding himself together. Mira saw it. She suspected others did too. Then call off your knights, Werner said, his voice slightly softer. Let us handle this through proper channels. If the boy is in human territory, we'll find him and return him safely. You'll forgive me if I don't trust humans with my son's safety, and you'll forgive us if we don't trust vampires occupying our towns. The tension was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike. Mira could see hands moving to weapons on both sides. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and Greybrook would become a bloodbath. She had to get Oren out.
Now.
Mira backed away slowly, pulling Leary with her, trying not to draw attention. They'd made it maybe 10 steps when a voice called out. That's her. That's the woman who helped the vampire boy. Gerald. Of course it was Gerald. Every eye in the square turned to Mira. Davin's gaze locked onto her with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. In 3 long strides, he was standing before her, towering over her, his presence suffocating. You saw my son, it wasn't a question. Myra's mind raced. Deny it? Impossible. Too many witnesses. Confirm it? She'd have to explain where he went.
Lie?
The king would know. Behind her, she heard the soft creak of the cart, the tarp shifting slightly.
No. Auron, no.
Stay hidden. Please stay hidden. I helped a hungry child buy food, Mira said, her voice steadier than she felt. That's all. Where did he go? I don't know. He ran when people started shouting. Davin leaned closer, and Mira could see the centuries of power and pain etched into his face. My son cannot speak. He cannot call for help. If he's injured, if he's scared, he's suffering in silence. If you know anything about where he is, I need you to tell me. The desperation in his voice was real. This wasn't a tyrant making threats. This was a father on the edge of breaking. Mira almost told him, almost revealed that Oren was safe, that he was 30 feet away, that this could all end peacefully. But then she remembered Oren's signs. When he's angry, he doesn't listen to anyone. If she revealed Oren now, in front of all these people, what would happen? Would Davin listen to why his son ran? Or would he simply drag Oren back to the castle, to the same isolation that drove him away?
I'm sorry, Mira whispered.
I don't know where he is. Davin's eyes searched her face, and for a terrible moment, Mira thought he saw through her lie. Then he stepped back. Search her house again. Search every building within a mile radius. Search the woods, the roads, every hiding place you can find, he turned to Werner. And if I find out the humans are hiding him, your precious accord will burn to ash. If we find him, Werner shot back, we'll return him. Unlike you, we don't terrorize children. The square erupted into chaos, shouting, accusations, weapons being drawn. And in the confusion, Mira ran back to her cart, grabbed the reins, and urged her horse forward. Mama, what's happening? Leary cried. We're leaving, sweetheart. Hold on tight. As they fled Greybrook, Mira could hear the sounds of confrontation escalating behind them, steel ringing against steel, screams of pain and fury. The war between humans and vampires had begun, and she was carrying the only thing that could stop it, or make it so much worse. The road to Windfall was barely more than a dirt path cutting through dense forest. Mira drove the cart hard for the first hour, not daring to look back, her knuckles white on the reins. Only when the sounds of Greybrook had faded completely did she finally slow the horse to a walk. Oren, she called softly. You can come out now. The tarp shifted, and Oren emerged, his face ashen. His hands trembled as he signed. I heard everything. My father, he sounded. Desperate. Mira signed back, keeping one hand on the reins. He's terrified for you. He's angry. There's a difference. Is there? Mira glanced at him. I have a daughter. If she disappeared, I'd tear the world apart too. Anger and fear look the same when you're a parent. Oren climbed into the front seat beside her, careful not to jostle Leary, who was dozing against her mother's side. For several minutes, they traveled in silence, the forest thick and green around them, birds singing as if the world wasn't tearing itself apart. Someone will die because of me, Oren finally signed, his movements heavy with guilt. Maybe already has. All because I wanted to see a bakery. You wanted to be free, Mira corrected. That's not wrong. Yes, it is. I'm not supposed to want freedom. I'm supposed to want duty, responsibility, to be the perfect, silent prince who never complains, never questions, never. His hands dropped. He couldn't finish the thought. Mira pulled the cart to a stop. She turned to face Oren fully, her expression fierce in a way he'd never seen before. Listen to me, she said aloud, then signed for emphasis. You are 11 years old. 11. You're supposed to want adventure and pastries and stupid, reckless things. You're not supposed to carry the weight of 2 kingdoms on your shoulders. But I do. Whether I want to or not. I know, her sign softened. But that doesn't mean you deserved the loneliness. It doesn't mean your father was right to ignore you. Oren looked away, blinking back tears. In the castle, he'd mastered the art of not crying. Crying without sound was pointless, and it only made the servants uncomfortable. But here, with Mira, the tears came freely. Can I tell you something? He signed hesitantly. Something I've never told anyone. Of course. His hands moved slowly, carefully, forming each sign with painful precision. The day I lost my voice, it wasn't an accident. Not completely. Myra's breath caught. What do you mean? I was training with my older brother, Cale. He was everything I wasn't: strong, confident, perfect. Our father loved him. Oren's signs grew more agitated. During sparring, I finally landed a hit. One single hit. And Cale got so angry. He said I cheated, that I was weak, that I'd never be worthy of the crown. Oren. He pushed me off the training wall. 30 feet down. Oren's hands shook now. The fall damaged my throat. The healers saved my life, but my voice was gone. And Cale, he told everyone it was an accident, that I slipped, and I couldn't speak to say otherwise. Myra's face had gone pale. Your father, does he know? Oren shook his head. Cale died 2 years later. Feral clan attack. He became a hero, and I became the backup heir who couldn't even defend himself. My father looks at me and sees failure. A reminder that his perfect son is dead, and he's stuck with me. That's not true. It is true. Oren's signs were sharp, almost violent. Do you know what it's like? To watch your father look through you every day? To know that if you could just speak, just explain, just be normal, maybe he'd love you again. Mira pulled Oren into her arms before he could protest, holding him tight as his body shook with silent sobs. Leary stirred, blinking sleepily, and without understanding the full context, wrapped her small arms around Oren too. You're not alone anymore, Leary mumbled, her words slurred with sleep and her speech impediment. Mama says nobody should be alone. The simple words, spoken with such pure conviction, broke something inside Oren. All the walls he'd built, all the careful control, it crumbled. He clung to Mira and Leary like they were the only solid things in a world that had spent 11 years trying to convince him he didn't matter. When the tears finally subsided, Mira signed, Does your father know about Cale? What really happened? How can I tell him? He can't understand signs. And even if he could, why would he believe me over Cale's memory? Because you're his son. Because the truth matters. The truth is I'm the reason his perfect heir is dead. If Cale hadn't been so angry at me, maybe he wouldn't have been reckless during that battle. Maybe he'd still be alive. Mira pulled back, gripping Oren's shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. Listen to me very carefully. What happened to you was not your fault. What happened to Cale was not your fault. You were a child.
You are a child.
None of this is your burden to carry. Then whose burden is it? Your father's. Myra's signs were firm, uncompromising. He's the parent. He should have noticed. He should have asked questions. He should have made you feel safe enough to tell the truth.
Oren had never thought of it that way.
He'd spent 5 years assuming the problem was him, that he was too broken, too much trouble, too difficult to love. But what if Mira was right? What if his father's distance wasn't about Oren's worthiness, but about Davin's failure? I'm scared, Oren signed honestly, of going back, of staying, of everything. Fear is okay. Fear means you're paying attention, Mira smiled sadly. But fear shouldn't make you invisible. You deserve to be seen, Oren. Really seen. Not as the mute prince or the backup heir or the broken one. Just as you. Who am I? The question was so simple, so profound, that Mira had to pause. She studied Oren's face, really studied it, seeing past the pale skin and the fangs and the royal bloodline to the boy underneath. You're brave, she signed slowly. You're kind. You're curious about the world. You care so much about others that you'd sacrifice your own freedom to keep them safe, she smiled. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. The world just needs to catch up. For the first time since escaping the castle, Oren felt something other than fear or guilt. It was small, fragile, barely there, but it felt like hope.
Thank you, he signed.
For seeing me. Thank you for trusting me enough to be seen. They sat there for a moment, the forest quiet around them, the world holding its breath. Then Leary yawned and announced, I'm hungry. Are we there yet? The moment broke, and Mira laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made Oren's lips twitch upward. Not yet, sweetheart. But soon. As they continued down the road, Oren made a decision. When they reached Windfall, when they finally contacted his father, he wouldn't hide anymore. He'd tell the truth, all of it. About Kale, about why he ran, about what he needed. And if his father couldn't accept it, then at least Oren would know he'd tried. For the first time in 5 years, he'd used his voice, not with words, but with truth. And that was enough. The journey to Windfall took 2 days, and they were the strangest, most wonderful days of Oren's life. On the first afternoon, they passed through a meadow where wildflowers grew in impossible colors, purple and gold and burning orange. Mira stopped the cart to let Leary pick flowers, and Oren, who had only ever seen the carefully maintained castle gardens, stood transfixed. Can I? He signed hesitantly, pointing at the flowers. Of course, Mira signed back, smiling. They're not owned by anyone. They're just free.
Free.
The word echoed in Oren's mind as he knelt in the grass, running his fingers over petals so soft they felt like whispers. In the castle, every flower had a purpose, a meaning, a place. These flowers simply existed, growing wild and unruly, answering to no one. Leary wove a crown of daisies and placed it on Oren's head, giggling at how the white flowers contrasted with his dark hair. You look like a fairy prince, she declared. Oren signed to Mira. What's she saying? She says you look magical. For a moment, Oren thought about correcting her. He was a vampire prince, not a fairy tale. But then he realized that maybe for just a little while he could be whatever he wanted to be. A boy in a flower crown. Nothing more, nothing less. That night, they made camp by a stream. Mira built a small fire while Oren helped Leary collect smooth stones from the water's edge. The little girl chattered constantly, her words sometimes difficult to understand, but her enthusiasm was universal. This one looks like a turtle, she exclaimed, holding up a rounded stone. And this one looks like... Mama, what does this look like? Like your imagination, Mira said warmly, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. Oren watched them with an ache in his chest. This was what family looked like, not formal dinners in echoing halls, not servants bowing and scraping, not the suffocating silence of duty and disappointment. This was messy and loud and full of life. Does it hurt? He signed to Mira when Leary was distracted by a firefly. Does what hurt? Losing your husband. Being alone. Myra's hands stilled over the pot. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When she finally signed back, her movements were careful, measured. Every day. But Leary helps. She reminds me that love doesn't end just because someone's gone. It changes shape. She looked at Oren. Your brother, do you miss him? Even after what he did.
Oren had to think about that.
Did he miss Kale? The brother who pushed him, who lied, who left him voiceless and alone. I miss who I thought he was. Oren signed slowly. Before I knew the truth. I miss the idea of having a brother who loved me. That's grief too, Mira signed, mourning what could have been. The firefly Leary had been chasing landed on Oren's hand. It glowed softly, pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. In the castle, insects were killed on sight, pests that disrupted the perfect order. But here, this small creature was simply living, sharing space with him for one brief moment. I've never seen one before. Oren signed with his free hand. Fireflies. We don't have them at the castle. Then you've been missing out, Mira signed. They're one of the best parts of summer. On the second day, They passed through a small village where a festival was taking place. Music poured from the town square, fiddles and drums and laughter. Mira tried to skirt around it, but Leary begged to stop, and Oren found himself curious despite the danger. "Just for a few minutes," Mira signed reluctantly. "Keep your hood up." The festival was overwhelming in the best way. Dancers spun in circles, their skirts flaring like flowers. Vendors sold roasted nuts and candied apples. Children ran through the crowd playing tag, their shrieks of joy piercing and perfect. Oren had attended countless royal balls, stiff, formal affairs where every step was choreographed, every smile calculated. This was nothing like that. This was chaos and beauty and people celebrating for no reason other than being alive. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, ran directly into Oren and bounced off. "Sorry," he yelled, then kept running. Just like that. No bowing, no fear, no recognition. To this child, Oren was just another person in the crowd. It was the most liberating feeling Oren had ever experienced. Leary wanted to dance, so Mira took her hand and spun her around, and before Oren knew what was happening, Leary had grabbed his hand too, pulling him into the circle. He stumbled at first. Vampire grace didn't translate to human folk dancing, but Leary just laughed and showed him the steps, patient and encouraging. For 10 perfect minutes, Oren danced. He spun and clapped and moved to music he'd never heard before, surrounded by humans who didn't know his name, didn't care about his silence, didn't see him as broken or cursed or wrong. They just saw a kid dancing at a festival. When they finally climbed back into the cart, breathless and happy, Oren signed. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me this. All of it. The flowers, the fireflies, the dancing. I didn't know the world could be so alive."
Yes,
Alive. Mira smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Your father should have shown you this. You shouldn't have had to run away to experience life. But I did run away. And I found you. So maybe it was worth it." As they approached Windfall that evening, the sun setting in streaks of pink and gold, Oren felt different. Not healed. He wasn't sure his wounds could heal that quickly, but changed. He'd tasted freedom, touched wildflowers, danced with strangers, and been treated like a person rather than a problem. Windfall appeared on the horizon, larger than Greybrook, with stone walls and a proper watchtower. Safer, Mira had promised. Far enough from the border that the vampire search parties wouldn't reach it immediately. But as they approached the gates, Oren felt a chill run down his spine. The guards at the entrance wore armor that gleamed too brightly in the dying light. And posted on the wall, visible even from a distance, were freshly painted notices. Wanted, information regarding the missing vampire prince. Reward, 1,000 gold sovereigns. Warning, harboring the prince is treason against both kingdoms. Myra's hands tightened on the reins. "They're here too. We should turn back," Oren signed frantically. "There's nowhere to turn back to." Myra's expression was grim. "Greybrook is occupied. The roads are being watched. Windfall is our only option. Then I'll turn myself in. Before anyone else gets hurt." "No," Myra's signs were sharp, definitive. "We didn't come this far for you to give up. But we find my sister. We figure out a plan. We do this carefully and correctly, so that when you face your father, it's on your terms. Not his." She met his eyes. "You deserve that much. Trust me." Oren wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he should sacrifice himself to end this nightmare. But the past 2 days had taught him something. Maybe, just maybe, he deserved to fight for his own happiness. "Okay," he signed. "I trust you." They passed through the Windfall gates just as the sun disappeared completely, plunging the world into darkness. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the watchtower. Neither of them saw the messenger raven take flight, heading north toward the Bloodstone Castle. The Vampire King was about to receive very interesting information, and Windfall's peace was about to shatter. Myra's sister, Elena, lived in a modest house near Windfall's western quarter, far enough from the main square to offer some privacy, but close enough to the markets that she could sell her herbal remedies to travelers. When she opened the door and saw Mira standing there with Leary and a cloaked stranger, her face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally resignation. "You're in trouble, aren't you?" Elena said, ushering them inside quickly. "How did you know?" "Because you only visit unannounced when something's gone catastrophically wrong." Elena locked the door behind them and closed all the curtains. "Last time, you'd accidentally insulted the mayor's wife. What is it this time? Murder? Arson?" "Worse." Mira pulled back Oren's hood. Elena stared at the pale boy with his distinctive red eyes and elegant features. Her face went white. "Oh, Mira, what have you done?" "She saved me," Oren signed.
Elena blinked.
"I don't understand sign language." "He says I saved him." Mira translated, her voice tired. "Which is true. And now we need your help." Over cups of strong tea, Mira explained everything. Oren's escape, the confrontation in Greybrook, the search parties, the growing tensions. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression growing more alarmed with each detail. "They're offering 1,000 gold for information," Elena said when Mira finished. "Do you understand what that means? People in this town would sell their own mothers for that kind of money." "Then we won't stay long," Oren signed, and Mira translated. "Just until we figure out how to contact my father safely." "Contact him." Elena laughed without humor. "Sweetheart, your father thinks you've been kidnapped. He's not going to sit down for a peaceful chat. He's going to assume whoever brings you forward is the kidnapper. But I'll tell him the truth." "Can he understand sign language?" Oren's hands froze mid-sign. The answer was obvious and devastating.
No.
His father had never bothered to learn. "Exactly," Elena said gently. "So, how do you communicate with a man who can't understand you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. It was the same problem Oren had faced his entire life, just magnified to kingdom-destroying proportions. "There has to be someone," Mira said. "Someone in the vampire court who knows sign language. Who could translate." "My tutor," Oren signed quickly. "Master Corvin. He's the one who taught me. He's old, but my father trusts him." "Can you write him a letter?" Elena asked. Oren shook his head. "I can't write common script well. Only the old vampire languages. Humans can't read it." They were stuck. Every solution led to another wall, another impossibility. Leary, who had been quietly playing with Elena's cat in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "Why doesn't Mama just tell the king? She's good at explaining things." The three adults looked at each other. Out of the mouths of babes, Elena murmured. "You do that." Oren signed to Mira, his eyes wide. "Face my father? Translate for me. If it means ending this peacefully?" Myra's smile was shaky, but genuine.
"Yes.
Of course. He could kill you. He has the authority and the rage. What if? Then I die knowing I tried to help a boy who deserved better." Myra's signs were firm. "But I don't think he will. I think he's a father who's scared, not a monster." "You didn't see him in Greybrook." "I saw exactly what I needed to see." Before Oren could respond, the church bells of Windfall began ringing, not the gentle hourly chimes, but the frantic emergency toll that meant danger. Elena rushed to the window and peered through a crack in the curtains. Her face went ashen. "Oh gods. Oh no." "What?" Mira joined her. Outside, the sky was darkening, not with night, but with wings. Dozens of Nightwing cavalry circled overhead, their massive bat mounts blotting out the stars. And on the streets, vampire soldiers poured through the gates, moving with military precision. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the figure walking calmly through Windfall's main street, and the crowd of terrified civilians parting before him like water. King Davin had come personally.
"How?"
Mira breathed. "How did he know?" Elena pointed to the watchtower, where a man in guard's uniform was climbing down, a satisfied smile on his face. "Marcus. That bastard. He must have sent word the moment you arrived." I have to go out there, Oren signed, already moving toward the door. Before he hurts anyone. Mira grabbed his arm.
Wait.
We do this smart. We do this together. There's no time. The front door exploded inward. Not broken down, exploded, the wood splintering into 1,000 pieces as if hit by an invisible force. King Davin stood in the doorway, his eyes glowing with barely contained power, his presence filling the small house like a storm. He looked at Elena with cold assessment, dismissed her, looked at Leary, paused, perhaps seeing an innocent child. Then his gaze fell on Mira, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. You, his voice was silk over steel. You lied to me in Greybrook. Mira stepped in front of Oren instinctively, her arms spread wide. Your Majesty. Step aside. The command carried such weight that Elena physically stumbled backward. Leary whimpered, and the cat yowled and fled. But Mira held her ground.
No.
Davin's eyes flared crimson. You dare. I dare because your son asked me to. Myra's voice shook, but she didn't move. And unlike everyone else in his life, I actually listen when he tries to communicate. The words hit Davin like a physical blow. Behind Mira, Oren stepped into view, and the king's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Relief. Raw, overwhelming relief flooded Davin's face, followed immediately by fury, followed by something that looked almost like grief. Oren, the king's voice cracked on the name. Do you have any idea, any concept, of what you've put me through? Oren's hands moved, signing rapidly, desperately. Father, I can explain. But Davin wasn't looking at his hands, wasn't seeing the signs. His eyes were fixed on Mira, and his expression was hardening back into rage. You took my son. You hid him from me. You let me believe. He took a step forward, and the floorboards creaked under the weight of his power. Give me one reason I shouldn't execute you where you stand. Because, Mira said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, I'm the only person in this room who can tell you what your son has been trying to say for 5 years. Davin paused. What? Please, Oren signed, tears streaming down his own face now. Please, father. Just this once. Listen. But the king still wasn't looking at his son's hands. He was looking at the woman who'd stolen his child. And outside, both vampire soldiers and human guards were taking up positions, waiting for the order that would turn Windfall into a battlefield. The powder keg was about to explode. And only Oren knew how to stop it. Everyone out. Davin's command was absolute. Clear the house.
Now.
Vampire knights flooded into Elena's home, their armor clanking, their presence suffocating. Elena grabbed Leary and tried to flee, but soldiers blocked the doorway. Let them go. Oren signed frantically, stepping between his father and Myra's family. They're innocent. They helped me. But Davin still wasn't watching his hands. The king's eyes were fixed on Mira with the intensity of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Your Majesty, Mira said, her voice surprisingly steady. If you'd just let me explain. Explain? Davin's laugh was bitter and cold. You kidnapped the heir to my throne. You hid him while I tore apart the countryside searching. What possible explanation justifies that? She didn't kidnap me. Oren's signs were violent now, almost desperate. I ran away. She found me and protected me. Mira watched Oren's hands, saw the anguish in every movement, and made a decision. Your son is trying to tell you something, she said loudly. My son cannot speak.
No.
But he can communicate. He's been trying to communicate with you for 5 years, and you've never once looked at his hands. The words echoed in the sudden silence. Davin's expression flickered, something that might have been shame, quickly buried under anger. I don't have time for your games, woman. Commander Saren, take my son back to the castle. The rest of you.
No.
Oren threw himself at Mira, wrapping his arms around her waist, his small body shaking with sobs. The gesture was clear even without words. I won't leave her. Davin's face contorted with conflicting emotions, rage that his son would choose a stranger over him, pain at the desperate fear in Oren's eyes. Oren, let go of her. She's manipulated you. Whatever she's told you. I told him he deserved to be seen, Mira shouted, and the raw emotion in her voice made even the vampire knights pause. I told him he wasn't broken. I told him that being unable to speak doesn't make him invisible. How dare you presume to know? Because I watched you in Greybrook. Myra's tears were flowing freely now, but her voice never wavered. You stood 3 feet from him and looked everywhere, but at his hands. Your son was right there, trying to communicate, and you ignored him because it was easier to focus on your rage than to see his pain. The accusation hung in the air like a curse. Davin's hands clenched into fists, his power crackling around him like lightning. For a moment, Mira thought she'd gone too far, that he would kill her where she stood. Then a new voice cut through the tension. She's right, Your Majesty. An elderly vampire stepped through the doorway. Master Corvin, Oren's tutor, his ancient face lined with centuries of wisdom and sorrow. He must have traveled with the king's entourage. Master Corvin? Davin's voice was dangerous. You dare. I dare because someone must. Corvin moved slowly into the room, his joints creaking with age. I've watched you ignore that boy's attempts to communicate for 5 years. I've watched him grow smaller and quieter, trying to take up less space in your life because he believed he was a burden. Master Corvin, don't. Oren tried to sign, but the old vampire gently pushed his hands down. No, child. It's time. Corvin turned to face Davin fully. Your Majesty, you lost one son. I understand your grief, we all do. But in your pain, you abandoned the son who remained. Oren has been trying to tell you something for 5 years. Perhaps it's time you listened. The room went deathly silent. Outside, Mira could hear the sounds of gathering crowds, human townspeople being corralled by vampire soldiers, tensions rising, weapons being readied. Davin looked at his son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He saw the tears, the fear, the desperate hope in those red eyes, so like his own. He saw a boy who was terrified of his own father. What? Davin's voice was barely a whisper. What has he been trying to tell me? Oren's hands trembled as he lifted them. May I? He signed to Mira. She nodded, wiping her eyes. He's asking permission to speak through me. Tell him. Oren signed slowly, each movement deliberate, that the fall wasn't an accident. Mira translated. He says the fall that took his voice wasn't an accident. Davin went very still. What? Oren's signs came faster now, 5 years of silence pouring out. Kale pushed me. During training. I finally landed a hit on him, and he got angry. He said I was weak, that I'd never be worthy. Then he pushed me off the wall. As Mira translated, she watched the color drain from Davin's face, an impressive feat for a vampire. Kale told everyone I slipped, and I couldn't speak to say otherwise. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't tell you the truth.
No, Davin, breathe.
Kale wouldn't. He was your brother. He was your perfect son. And I was the one who survived. That's why you can't look at me, isn't it? Because every time you see me, you remember him. And you wish it was the other way around. The truth hit like a physical blow. Davin actually staggered backward, his hand reaching for support that wasn't there. Oren, that's not. I never. The king's voice broke. For the first time in centuries, the mighty King Davin was at a loss for words. I ran away, Oren continued, his signs growing more confident now that the dam had broken, because I needed to see if anyone in the world could see me as something other than the broken prince. The spare air. The disappointment. Myra's voice cracked as she translated, but she pushed through. And Mira did. A human woman who'd never met me, who owed me nothing. She saw me. She learned my language. She protected me. She treated me like I mattered. She gave me 2 days of being alive instead of just existing. The room was silent except for Myra's translations. Elena held Leary close, both of them crying. Master Corvin's ancient face was wet with tears. Even the vampire knights seemed uncomfortable, their eyes averted. So, if you want to punish someone, Father, punish me. I'm the one who ran. I'm the one who started this. But Mira and her family, they're heroes, not criminals. Davin looked at his son's hands, finally, truly, watching the signs that formed Oren's voice. And in that moment, he saw what he'd been refusing to see for 5 years. A child who'd been screaming silently for help, for recognition, for love. And he'd been too consumed by his own grief to notice. Oren, the king said, his voice thick with emotion. But before he could finish, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting. The clash of steel. A scream. Commander Saren burst into the house, his face grim. Your Majesty, the humans are rioting. Captain Werner has arrived with reinforcements. They're demanding we leave Windfall immediately, or they'll attack. We're in the middle of. They've taken hostages, sire. 3 of our scouts. And they're threatening to execute them if we don't withdraw. Davin's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable father disappearing behind the mask of the warrior king. Mobilize all forces. Defensive positions. No one attacks unless.
No.
Oren's signs were desperate. This is exactly what I was afraid of. More violence. More death. When does it stop? When they stop threatening my people. They're your people too. Humans and vampires. We're supposed to protect each other, not destroy each other. Mira translated, her voice rising. He says, when does the violence stop? When do you start protecting instead of destroying? Tell my son, Davin said coldly, that the world doesn't work that way. Then change it. Oren signed, and even without translation, the fury in his movements was clear. You're the king. If you can't change it, who can? Outside, the sounds of conflict grew louder. Windfall was about to become a battlefield. And Oren was running out of time to stop it. Take me to them, Oren signed, his hands sharp and decisive. Absolutely not, Davin said after Mira translated. You're not going anywhere near. They're fighting over me.
I'm the reason people are about to die.
So take me to them and let me fix this. You're a child. This isn't your responsibility. Then whose responsibility is it? Oren's signs were almost violent now. Yours? Because you've done such a great job communicating so far. The barb hit its mark. Davin's jaw clenched, but he couldn't deny the truth of it. Master Corvin stepped forward. Perhaps the boy is right, Your Majesty. Perhaps it's time for a different approach. A different approach? Davin's voice dripped with sarcasm. What do you suggest? We hold hands and sing songs while they execute our soldiers. I suggest you let your son speak. Corvin signed, his old hands moving slowly but deliberately.
Really speak.
To everyone. Let both sides see what this conflict is actually about. Mira translated for the humans in the room, and Elena gasped. You want to take him out there? In front of the mob? Yes, Oren signed, his expression resolved. Take me to Dawnridge Bridge. It's neutral ground, between the human quarter and the vampire encampment. How do you know about Dawnridge Bridge? Davin asked suspiciously. I ask questions during the journey. I learn things. That's what happens when people actually communicate with me. The jab made Davin wince, but he nodded slowly. Very well. But I'm coming with you. And if this goes wrong, it won't be worse than what's already happening. 20 minutes later, an unlikely procession made its way to Dawnridge Bridge, a narrow stone structure spanning a shallow river that marked the boundary between Windfall's human and vampire-controlled sections. Oren walked at the center, flanked by Davin on one side and Mira on the other. Behind them came Master Corvin, Commander Saren, and a dozen vampire knights. Elena had insisted on bringing Leary, arguing that a child might help humanize the situation. On the other side of the bridge, Captain Werner waited with his human forces, at least 50 soldiers, all armed, all tense. And in front of them, on their knees with swords at their throats, were 3 vampire scouts, their eyes blazing with defiant fury. The fog hung thick over the river, turning the scene into something out of a nightmare. Torches flickered on both sides, casting dancing shadows. The crowd behind Werner had swelled, townspeople armed with pitchforks and clubs, their faces twisted with fear and rage. "King Davin," Werner called out, his voice carrying across the bridge. "You have 1 minute to withdraw your forces from Windfall, or these vampires die. You execute them, and I'll raze this entire town to the ground," Davin replied coldly. "Then we'll have war." "So be it. Stop." Oren's signs were so forceful that even those who didn't understand sign language could sense the urgency. He pulled away from his father and walked to the center of the bridge, the exact midpoint between both sides. "The boy.
Werner squinted.
That's the missing prince. Tell them." Oren signed to Mira, who had followed him. "Tell them everything." Myra's hands shook as she began to translate, her voice amplified by the strange acoustics of the fog-shrouded bridge. "I am Prince Oren of the Bloodstone Dynasty. And I wasn't kidnapped. I ran away." The crowd erupted in confusion. Davin started to move forward, but Master Corvin held him back with surprising strength. "I ran away because I was invisible in my own home. Because losing my voice 5 years ago made me disappear in my father's eyes." Mira translated, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I wanted to see the human world, the world I've been forbidden from exploring. I wanted to know if anyone could see me as more than the broken prince." The silent disappointment. On both sides of the bridge, the anger was shifting to confusion, then to something that looked like understanding. "I went to Greybrook. I tried to buy food. And people were afraid of me. They saw a vampire, a monster, not a hungry child. But then this woman," Oren gestured to Mira, "this single mother who'd never met me, who owed me nothing." She stopped. "She signed to me. She saw me." Tears were streaming down Myra's face as she translated. "She saw me when my own father couldn't." Davin's face crumpled with that, but he remained silent. "She protected me, fed me, gave her daughter and me shelter. And then both sides decided she was a criminal. Both sides decided this was about kidnapping and politics and old grudges. But it was never about any of that." Oren turned to face his father directly. It was about a boy who wanted his father to look at his hands when he was trying to speak. It was about being so lonely that running away into danger seemed better than staying safe, but invisible. The bridge was silent now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. "My brother, Kale, your perfect son, he pushed me off that wall. He's the reason I lost my voice. And I've spent 5 years unable to tell you, because you never bothered to learn my language." Davin's hands were shaking. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood beside his son on the bridge. For a long moment he simply looked at Oren, really, truly looked at him. Then, slowly, painfully, Davin knelt on the cold stone. A king, kneeling before his child. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The crowd gasped. Vampire knights stared in shock. Even Werner lowered his sword, slightly. Davin lifted his hands, clumsy, unpracticed, and formed the basic signs that Master Corvin must have taught him years ago, but that he'd never bothered to use. "Forgive me." The signs were rough, barely legible, but they were an attempt. An effort. A bridge across 5 years of silence. Oren threw himself into his father's arms, sobbing silently against his chest. Davin held him tight, tighter than he'd held him since before the fall, and for the first time in 5 years, looked like a father instead of a king. Master Corvin stepped forward, his old voice carrying across the bridge. The prince was never kidnapped.
He was saved.
By a human woman who showed him more kindness in 2 days than we showed him in 5 years. He turned to face Werner. "Is this what we're fighting over? A misunderstanding? Fear?"
Pride?
Werner looked at his hostages, at the vampire knights ready to attack, at the scared townspeople behind him. Then he looked at the small boy clinging to his father on the bridge. Slowly, he sheathed his sword. "Release them," he ordered his soldiers. The vampire scouts were freed. They rushed across the bridge, bowing to Davin, checking on Oren with genuine concern in their eyes. Davin stood, still holding his son. He turned to address both sides. "My son is safe. The woman who protected him, Mira Ashford, and her family are under my personal protection. Anyone who harms them answers to me." Then he turned to Werner. "Captain, I propose a meeting. Tomorrow. You, me, and representatives from both sides. We end this cycle of suspicion and violence. We start communicating." The word, so simple, so obvious, was said with weight and meaning. Werner studied Davin's face, saw the genuine remorse there, and slowly nodded. "Tomorrow. Neutral ground. We talk." The tension didn't disappear entirely. Centuries of mistrust couldn't evaporate in one night, but it cracked. The first ray of light breaking through centuries of darkness. As the crowds began to disperse, Oren turned to Mira and signed. "Thank you for giving me a voice." She signed back. "You always had a voice. The world just needed to learn how to listen." And on Dawnridge Bridge, in the lifting fog of early morning, both sides had finally heard. 3 weeks after the confrontation at Dawnridge Bridge, Bloodstone Castle looked different to Oren. The stone walls were the same, the tapestries unchanged, the grand halls as imposing as ever, but somehow, everything felt less suffocating. Maybe it was because his father had started learning sign language. Davin was terrible at it. His hands were too big, his movements too stiff, his centuries of royal formality making the fluid gestures awkward. But every morning at breakfast he practiced. Every evening he sat with Master Corvin for lessons. And every time he saw Oren, he tried to sign at least one greeting, one question, one connection. "Good morning, son. Did you sleep well?" Davin's signs were slow, clumsy, but genuine. "Yes, father. Did you?" Oren signed back, patient with the pauses as his father tried to remember the right movements. "I slept." Davin struggled with the next sign, then gave up and spoke aloud with a rueful smile. "I'm still learning." "You're doing well." Oren signed and meant it. But the biggest change wasn't in the castle, it was in the kingdom itself. The Treaty of Dawnridge Bridge, as historians would later call it, had reshaped relations between vampires and humans. Trade agreements were renegotiated. Border towns received protection from both sides. And, most importantly, cultural exchange programs were established, humans teaching vampires their customs, vampires sharing their history with humans. It wasn't perfect. Centuries of mistrust didn't disappear overnight. But it was a start. And at the center of it all, surprisingly, was Mira Ashford. Davin had not only granted her and Elena protection, he'd offered them positions in his court. Elena declined, preferring her quiet life in Windfall. But Mira accepted on one condition: she would serve as the kingdom's first official translator and advocate for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Now, she stood in the Grand Council chamber, translating as Oren addressed the assembled nobles, something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "The new school will teach both vampire and human children," Oren signed, his movements confident now that he knew someone was truly listening.
Together.
"So they grow up understanding each other instead of fearing each other." Myra's voice carried his words through the hall. "Prince Oren proposes an integrated academy where children of both races can learn side by side." The vampire nobles shifted uncomfortably. One elderly countess spoke up. "Your Highness," with respect, "mixing the races so young could be dangerous. What if the human children are harmed by our younglings? What if they're not?" Oren signed back. "What if, instead of assuming the worst, we give them a chance to prove the best?" Another noble: "And if the humans reject this idea?" "They won't," Mira interjected. "Captain Werner and I have already discussed it. The human territories are willing to send students, provided we guarantee their safety." "Which we will." Oren signed firmly. "This is our chance to build something new. Something better than what we had." Davin, seated on his throne, watched his son with an expression of pride mixed with regret. Pride at who Oren was becoming, regret for the years he'd wasted ignoring him. When the council session ended, Davin approached Oren and signed, haltingly, "You did good." Oren smiled and signed back, "Thank you. But I couldn't have done it without her." He gestured to Mira, who was gathering her papers. Davin turned to Mira and, speaking aloud, said something he never thought he'd say to a human. "Thank you for saving my son, and for saving me from my own blindness." Mira bowed slightly. "I didn't save him, Your Majesty. I just saw him. That's all any of us really want, to be seen." Later that evening, Oren stood in his tower room, the same room he'd escaped from a month ago. But now, the window didn't look like a barrier. It looked like a view. A knock at the door, then Davin entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He sat on Oren's bed, something he hadn't done in 5 years, and unwrapped the package. It was a book, old, leather-bound, with pages yellowed by time. "What is it?" Oren signed. Davin opened to the first page, where elegant script read, "The Journal of Prince Kael, heir to the Bloodstone throne." Oren's hands froze. "Kael's journal? I found it after you told me the truth," Davin said softly. "I couldn't believe that Kael would, that he could." His voice broke. "But I needed to know." And Davin turned to a page marked with a ribbon. He wrote about the day he pushed you, about his jealousy, his anger, his shame afterward. He wrote, "Father loves me because I'm perfect. If I show weakness, if Oren surpasses me, what will I have left?" Tears welled in Oren's eyes. "He was broken too," Davin continued. "I put so much pressure on him to be perfect that he couldn't bear to be anything less. And when you, my beautiful, talented, brave son, landed that hit during sparring, it shattered his illusion. I never wanted to replace him," Oren signed. "I just wanted to be good enough." "You were always good enough." Davin's voice was thick with emotion. "I was the one who failed you both. I loved Kael's perfection instead of Kael. And when you lost your voice, I couldn't face my guilt, so I pretended you weren't there." He set the journal aside and pulled Oren into his arms, a real embrace, not the formal acknowledgement of a royal heir, but the desperate hold of a father who'd almost lost everything. "I'm learning," Davin whispered. "I'm learning to see you,
To hear you.
to be the father you deserved all along." Oren buried his face in his father's shoulder and cried, silent, shaking sobs that released years of pain and loneliness and desperate hope. 2 days later, Oren made a request that surprised everyone. "I want to visit Mira and Lyri." Davin didn't hesitate. "Of course. When?" "This weekend. Can we stay for dinner? I want to show you what a real family looks like." The words could have been cruel, but Oren signed them with gentleness, and Davin understood. This was an invitation, not an accusation. That Saturday, King Davin of the Bloodstone dynasty sat at a simple wooden table in Myra's new home, upgraded significantly with royal funding, eating stew and listening to Lyri chatter about her day at the new integrated school. And then Marcus, he's a vampire boy, he helped me with my reading. He didn't laugh when I got stuck on words, he just waited. Like Oren taught him to wait. "Patience is a gift," Oren signed, and Mira translated. "Exactly." Lyri beamed. "That's what Marcus said too." Davin watched this interaction, his son laughing silently, this human woman translating effortlessly, her daughter including Oren in the conversation as if his silence was just another way of speaking, and understood what Oren had meant. This was what he'd been missing. Not perfection, not formality, just connection. After dinner, as they prepared to leave, Oren signed to Mira. "Can I visit again? Next month?" "You can visit whenever you want," Mira said warmly. "You're family now." "Family." Oren repeated the sign, letting his hands linger on the word. In the carriage ride home, Davin watched his son stare out the window, a small smile on his face. He tried to remember the last time he'd seen Oren smile like that. He couldn't. Father, Oren signed, getting his attention. Thank you. For what? For learning my language. For trying. For finally seeing me. Davin's hands moved slowly, carefully, forming the signs Master Corvin had drilled into him. I see you. I hear you. I love you. The signs were imperfect, the grammar wrong, but the meaning was clear. Oren signed back. I love you too. 6 months later, the Royal Academy of Unity opened its doors to its first class of students, 20 vampire children, 20 human children, all learning together under the guidance of teachers from both races. And on the wall of the entrance hall hung a portrait, Prince Oren, standing between a vampire king and a human single mother, his hands frozen mid-sign, his expression peaceful. The plaque beneath read, He taught us that silence isn't empty, it's full of words we forgot to learn. Oren never forgot the 2 days he spent in the human world, trying to order pastries, running from fear, and finding kindness in unexpected places. And more importantly, the world never forgot that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sign your truth when no one's looking at your hands. Until someone finally does. And everything changes.
The end.